The fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous tune, a sterile counterpoint to the nervous chatter filling the advanced calculus classroom. Jasmine felt the familiar prickle of unease as she stepped inside, the air thick with the unspoken language of privilege and expectation. The room, a tiered expanse of polished wood and unforgiving steel chairs, seemed to amplify her isolation. Rows of faces, predominantly white and Asian, turned toward her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and something colder, something that bordered on dismissal. She knew the look. It wasn't overt hostility, not yet, but the subtle arch of an eyebrow, the almost imperceptible tightening of lips, spoke volumes. They already think I don't belong, she thought, her stomach clenching. They think this is some kind of mistake. She found a seat near the back, a strategic retreat that offered a panoramic view of the battlefield. The worn textbook in her hands felt strangely comforting, a tangible reminder of the hours she'd poured into preparation, the nights she'd sacrificed to master concepts that came so effortlessly to others. It was her shield, her proof against their unspoken accusations. The hushed anticipation in the room thickened as Dr. Langley strode to the front, his presence commanding an immediate silence. He was a man who wore his intellect like armor, his sharp features and piercing gaze radiating an almost palpable aura of superiority. He surveyed the room, his eyes lingering for a fraction of a second longer on Jasmine, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Jasmine's breath hitched. It was a look she'd become accustomed to, a silent interrogation that questioned her right to be there, to occupy space in this hallowed hall of academia. He's going to do it again, she thought, the familiar wave of resentment washing over her. He's going to make it clear that I'm not welcome. Good morning, Langley began, his voice smooth and measured, each syllable precise. Before we begin, let's make sure everyone is where they need to be. His gaze swept over the room again, this time pausing pointedly at Jasmine. The air crackled with unspoken tension. This is not a general math course, he continued, his tone laced with a subtle condescension. If you're looking for something more introductory, now's the time to make that correction. The words hung in the air, a thinly veiled challenge directed squarely at her. Jasmine felt a flush rise in her cheeks, the heat of indignation warring with the icy grip of anxiety. He thinks he can scare me off, she thought, her fingers tightening around her pen. He thinks I'll wilt under his gaze. But a different kind of fire was igniting within her, a slow burn of defiance that refused to be extinguished. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Let him think what he wanted. She knew her worth, her capabilities. His petty attempts at intimidation wouldn't deter her. Dr. Whitmore, a younger, sharper presence, entered the room, his eyes scanning the students with a clinical detachment. He nodded curtly to Langley, a silent acknowledgement of their shared authority, their shared understanding of the unspoken hierarchy that permeated the classroom. Jasmine had noticed Whitmore's subtle dismissals before, the way he'd overlook her contributions in class discussions, the almost imperceptible shift in his posture when she approached him with question. He wasn't as overtly condescending as Langley, but his complicity was just as damaging. It was a quiet, insidious form of exclusion, a constant reminder that she didn't quite fit in, that she was an anomaly in their carefully curated world. The lecture began, a torrent of complex equations and abstract theories. Jasmine listened intently, her mind a whirlwind of calculations and deductions. She understood the material, grasped the nuances that seemed to elude others. Yet, she remained silent, unwilling to expose herself to their scrutiny, their inevitable skepticism. She'd learned to navigate this precarious landscape, to conserve her energy, to choose her battles. This wasn't the time. Not yet. The midterm challenge, presented with a flourish of dramatic pronouncements by Langley, was designed to be a breaking point. This problem, he declared, his voice ringing with a smug satisfaction, has stumped some of the brightest minds in the field. I don't expect any of you to solve it completely, but your attempts will demonstrate your understanding of the core principles. He projected the equation onto the board, a daunting array of symbols and variables that elicited a collective groan from the class. Jasmine studied the problem, her mind racing. It was complex, certainly, but not insurmountable. She saw the patterns, the underlying logic, the elegant solution that lay hidden within the seemingly impenetrable maze of numbers. A slow smile spread across her face. This was her opportunity. The hours that followed were a blur of focused concentration. While the rest of the class struggled, their whispers of frustration filling the air, Jasmine worked methodically, her pen gliding across the pages with a quiet confidence. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were observing the scene from a distance, watching herself dismantle their carefully constructed world of assumptions and prejudices. The solution, when it finally revealed itself, was both simple and profound, a testament to her innate understanding of the intricate dance of numbers. The silence that descended upon the classroom when Jasmine submitted her paper was deafening. Langley's condescending smile faltered, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Whitmore's detached demeanor cracked, his eyes widening in surprise. The other students, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and resentment, stared at her as if she were some kind of alien being. The air, thick with unspoken expectations, had shifted, the balance of power subtly altered. Jasmine met their gazes, her own expression calm and unwavering. She'd proven herself, not just to them, but to herself. She belonged, and they couldn't take that away from her. The quiet fire within her burned brighter now, a steady flame of resilience that would light her path forward. The fluorescent lights of the lecture hall hummed, a monotonous drone that seemed to amplify the oppressive silence following Dr. Langley's pointedly rhetorical question. Jasmine could feel the weight of unseen eyes, the collective gaze of her peers, settling upon her. Her fingers tightened around the worn spine of her textbook, the rough texture grounding her in the tangible as Langley's words echoed in her mind. "So, Miss Tran, perhaps you'd care to enlighten us?" The saccharine tone hadn't concealed the barb, the implication that she was somehow out of her depth, an interloper in this hallowed hall of academia. She'd offered a solution, a concise and elegant proof that deviated from the cumbersome method Langley favored. His response had been a dismissive wave of the hand, a condescending smile that didn't reach his eyes. Interesting approach, but let's stick to the prescribed method, shall we? Stick to the prescribed method. The words chafed, a subtle reminder of her place, or rather, the place they perceived her to occupy, a place on the periphery. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the rustling of papers and the quiet tap of Dr. Whitmore's pen against the lectern. He was observing her, Jasmine knew, with that detached, clinical gaze that made her skin crawl. Whitmore's silence was, in some ways, more unsettling than Langley's open disdain. It was a silent agreement, a complicity in the subtle erosion of her confidence, her sense of belonging. She could almost hear the unspoken whispers, the doubts that they seeded in the minds of her classmates. Does she really belong here? Is she truly as bright as she seems? The questions hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Jasmine drew a slow, steadying breath, forcing herself to focus on the equations scrolling across the projection screen. The symbols, at least, offered a semblance of order, a refuge from the chaotic undercurrents of the lecture hall. Whitmore began to speak, his voice crisp and precise as he delved into the intricacies of multivariable calculus. Jasmine listened intently, her mind racing to keep pace with his rapid-fire explanations. He was deliberately rushing through the material. She realized, a tactic designed to overwhelm the students, to assert his intellectual dominance. A subtle flexing of academic muscle. The others struggled to keep up, their frantic note-taking a testament to the professor's breakneck speed. But Jasmine found herself several steps ahead, her mind already anticipating the next logical leap, the inevitable conclusion. When Whitmore paused, seemingly to catch his breath, Jasmine spoke, her voice clear and unwavering. Wouldn't the application of Stokes' theorem simplify this particular derivation, Dr. Whitmore? The air in the lecture hall thickened, the collective intake of breath almost audible. Jasmine could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the sudden palpable tension. Whitmore's pen stilled, hovering over the whiteboard. He turned, his gaze sharp and assessing. He considered her for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Then, with a dismissive flick of his wrist, he resumed his lecture. "We're moving on." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. "We're moving on. Your insight is irrelevant. Your contribution is unwelcome." Jasmine felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, rising in her chest. She wanted to argue, to challenge his blatant disregard for her observation. But what was the point? She knew from experience that any further attempt to engage would be met with the same dismissive indifference, the same subtle but effective silencing. This wasn't about academics, not really. It was about power, about maintaining the established hierarchy, about keeping her in her perceived place. She swallowed the bitter taste of frustration, her gaze fixed on the complex equations unfolding on the screen. "We're moving on," she echoed internally, the words taking on a new meaning. "Yes, I'm moving on. Beyond your petty games, beyond your attempts to diminish me." The anger slowly subsided, replaced by a quiet resolve, a steely determination. She would not be deterred. She would not be silenced. She would excel, not for their approval, but for herself. She would master this intricate dance of academia, navigate its treacherous currents, and emerge stronger, more resilient than ever. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the steady rhythm of her own thoughts, the quiet hum of her unwavering ambition. The lecture continued, a blur of equations and theorems, but Jasmine's focus had shifted. She was no longer seeking their validation. She was charting her own course, forging her own path, and in that quiet defiance, she found a strange sense of liberation. The subtle sneers of her classmates, the condescending dismissals of her professors, they were but fleeting distractions, insignificant whispers against the rising tide of her own potential. She would not be broken. She would not be silenced. She would rise. The heavy oak door of the lecture hall creaked closed behind her, the sound swallowed by the low hum of conversation that spilled into the hallway. Jasmine paused, her hand still resting on the cool metal of the door handle. The echo of Dr. Langley's dismissive tone, "Ms. Nguyen, perhaps you should focus on grasping the fundamentals before attempting such ambitious solutions," reverberated in her mind, a bitter taste coating her tongue. She hadn't missed the subtle smirk that played on his lips, or the knowing glance he shared with Dr. Whitmore. They were a united front, these two, gatekeepers of knowledge who seemed determined to keep her out. The hallway buzzed with students, their voices a chaotic symphony of complaints and casual banter. A knot tightened in Jasmine's chest, a familiar sensation of isolation pressing down on her. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit she hadn't been able to break. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. She longed for the quiet sanctuary of a library, for the comforting weight of a textbook in her hands. "She's trying way too hard." A voice sliced through the general murmur, sharp and dismissive. Jasmine's breath hitched. She recognized the voice Sarah Jenkins, whose perfectly manicured nails and designer handbag seemed to scream privilege. "Langley's definitely going to wash her out before finals." A wave of icy anger washed over Jasmine. She'd known. She'd sensed the whispers, the sidelong glances, the subtle exclusion. But hearing it articulated so bluntly, so casually, ripped away the last vestiges of denial. They saw her as an outsider, an intruder in their carefully curated academic world. They didn't believe she belonged. They wanted her gone. Jasmine closed her eyes briefly, willing her racing pulse to slow. This anger, this simmering resentment, it was a dangerous fuel. She could let it consume her, or she could channel it, use it to ignite her resolve. She chose the latter. A flicker of something hard and unyielding ignited within her, a cold fire that burned brighter than any fleeting emotion. I doubt she even understands half the material. Another voice chimed in, laced with a condescending pity that stung more than outright mockery. It's like she's speaking a different language. Jasmine's fingers tightened around the strap of her worn canvas bag. A different language? Perhaps. Perhaps she spoke the language of dedication, of relentless pursuit of knowledge, of sleepless nights spent poring over textbooks and research papers. Perhaps they, with their effortless confidence and inherited advantages, couldn't understand the vocabulary of hard work and unwavering determination. A bitter laugh threatened to escape her lips. They thought she was struggling? They thought she was out of her depth? They had no idea. They hadn't seen the elegant simplicity of the solution to the problem Langley had presented in class, the one he deemed unsolvable. They hadn't seen the intricate web of connections she'd woven in her mind, the effortless way she dissected the complex layers of the equation. They saw only her quiet demeanor, her lack of flashy pronouncements, her refusal to engage in their petty academic one-upmanship. They mistook her silence for weakness, her humility for ignorance. They judged her by the worn fabric of her bag, the outdated cut of her clothes, the quiet intensity of her gaze. They couldn't see past the surface, couldn't comprehend the depth of her understanding. A surge of something akin to exhilaration coursed through her veins. This was the challenge she craved. To dismantle their preconceived notions, to shatter their carefully constructed world of privilege and assumed superiority. To prove them wrong, not for their sake, but for her own. To reclaim her voice, to assert her place, to demand the recognition she deserved. The image of Langley's condescending smile flashed in her mind, fueling the fire in her belly. Let them underestimate her. Let them dismiss her. Let them think they could break her. She would show them what it meant to be underestimated. She would show them the strength that lay hidden beneath the surface, the quiet power of a mind that refused to be confined by their narrow expectations. She turned away from the chattering group, their voices fading into the background noise. The hallway stretched before her, no longer a corridor of intimidation, but a path leading toward the challenge she was more than ready to face. The weight of their judgment no longer burdened her. It propelled her forward. She had a midterm to ace, a point to prove, and a world to conquer. The quiet fire within her burned brighter, steadier, a beacon of unwavering resolve in the face of adversity. The game, she realized with a chilling certainty, had just begun. The fluorescent hum of the library lights buzzed in the quiet, a steady, almost hypnotic drone that mirrored the rhythm of Jasmine's pen against the crisp pages of her notebook. Outside, the night pressed against the large windows, a dark, indifferent canvas against which the interior world of focused study glowed warmly. She could almost feel the weight of the darkness, a tangible presence separated only by a pane of glass. Yet inside, within this sanctuary of knowledge, she felt a different kind of weight, the weight of expectation, the weight of prejudice, the weight of being constantly underestimated. It settled in her chest, a cold, hard knot that she consciously worked to unravel with each precise annotation, each meticulously crafted equation. The library, usually bustling with students, was now eerily deserted. Long rows of shelves stretched away into the dimly lit corners, the spines of books a silent testament to centuries of accumulated knowledge. Jasmine inhaled the scent of aged paper and binding glue, a familiar comfort in this lonely space. She had deliberately chosen a secluded corner tucked away behind a towering stack of journals on theoretical physics. It was a strategic retreat, a place where the whispers and stares that followed her in the crowded lecture halls couldn't reach. Here, surrounded by the silent wisdom of countless minds, she could almost believe she was invisible, free to exist without the burden of others' perceptions. Earlier that day, Dr. Langley's voice had dripped with condescension as he'd posed the midterm challenge, a problem so complex he'd deemed it unsolvable within the time frame given. His eyes, magnified by his thick-rimmed glasses, had lingered on Jasmine for a fraction of a second too long, a subtle, but unmistakable message delivered. She recognized the tactic, the thinly veiled attempt to discourage, to subtly reinforce the notion that she, a scholarship student from a background deemed unsuitable for the hallowed halls of this prestigious university, didn't belong. Dr. Whitmore, his younger, sharper colleague, had stood beside him, a silent accomplice, his silence perhaps even more damning than Langley's open disdain. Whitmore's silence was a passive acceptance, a tacit agreement that Jasmine's presence was an anomaly, a disruption to the established order. She closed her eyes, the sting of their dismissal still fresh. It wasn't the first time, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. The academic world, cloaked in its veneer of intellectual pursuit, was as susceptible to prejudice and power plays as any other. But within the quiet solitude of the library, a different kind of power stirred within her. It wasn't the power of influence or position, the kind wielded so effortlessly by Langley and his ilk. It was something deeper, something forged in the fires of constant challenge, the quiet, unwavering strength of a mind that refused to be confined. She opened her notebook again, the intricate equations of familiar landscape. The problem Langley had presented, designed to intimidate and discourage, now held a strange allure. It was a puzzle, a complex and intricate lock waiting to be picked. And Jasmine, despite the gnawing anxiety that threatened to constrict her chest, felt a thrill course through her. This was her domain, the world of numbers and theories, where logic reigned supreme and prejudice held no sway. Hours melted away, marked only by the rustling of pages and the soft scratch of her pen. The library grew colder as the night deepened, but Jasmine hardly noticed. She was lost in the labyrinthine corridors of the problem, each step forward revealing new complexities, new challenges. Doubt, that insidious whisper that often accompanied such intellectual endeavors, occasionally surfaced, but she pushed it back with the same quiet determination she had learned to cultivate over years of battling against preconceived notions. A faint flicker of understanding, like a distant star in the vast expanse of the unknown, began to emerge. She leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat as the disparate pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. It was a slow, painstaking process, requiring meticulous calculation and unwavering focus. But the closer she got to the solution, the more palpable the thrill became, a quiet hum of excitement that resonated within her. Finally, as the first rays of dawn began to filter through the windows, painting the eastern sky in hues of rose and gold, the answer materialized before her. It was elegant, almost deceptively simple, a testament to the power of logic and perseverance. She stared at the final equation, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. The knot in her chest had loosened, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph, a profound satisfaction that transcended the mere solving of a problem. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the silent witnesses of centuries of intellectual pursuit, Jasmine understood something fundamental about herself. The prejudice, the subtle dismissals, the constant pressure to prove herself, they were all external forces, attempts to define her by parameters she refused to accept. Her true strength lay not in seeking their validation, but in her unwavering commitment to her own intellectual journey. The solution to Langley's unsolvable problem wasn't just a mathematical triumph. It was a declaration of independence, a silent assertion of her right to exist and excel in a world that often tried to deny her that right. As she closed her notebook, the rising sun casting long shadows across the library floor, Jasmine felt a quiet, unshakable resolve solidify within her. The fight was far from over, but she was ready. The stale air of the classroom hung heavy, thick with the scent of cheap printing ink and the quiet desperation of students hunched over their midterm papers. Jasmine felt the weight of gazes, not directly on her, but hovering around her, like vultures circling a wounded animal. She could almost taste the anticipation, the unspoken expectation of her failure. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a monotonous drone that mirrored the anxiety thrumming in her veins. She stared at the final problem on the exam, a single, stark equation mocking her with its deceptive simplicity. It was a challenge, Langley had announced with a smirk, an unsolvable problem designed to separate the wheat from the chaff. Jasmine's fingers tightened around her pen, the plastic creaking faintly. Unsolvable. The word echoed in her mind, a challenge disguised as a dismissal. She knew this problem. She'd encountered a variation of it buried deep within a theoretical physics journal, a footnote dismissed by most, but one that had sparked her curiosity for weeks. Had Langley known? Had he deliberately chosen this problem to expose her, to prove his point about her supposed inadequacy? Or was it simply another brick in the wall of indifference he'd built around her, another way to reinforce her invisibility? A wave of nausea rolled over her. The room felt colder, the air constricted in her lungs. She thought of all the nights she'd spent poring over textbooks, the quiet hours stolen from sleep to chase understanding, to build her knowledge, brick by painstaking brick. And for what? To be met with this calculated attempt to erase her, to reduce her to nothing more than another ambitious but ultimately unsuccessful student. The thought was a bitter pill, harder to swallow than any academic humiliation. It wasn't just about the problem, the exam, or even the grade. It was about the constant, insidious erosion of her confidence, the subtle yet persistent message that she didn't belong. A cough ripped through the silence, a sharp, staccato sound that seemed to amplify the tension in the room. Dr. Langley, perched on the edge of his desk, surveyed the room with an air of detached amusement. His eyes, sharp and calculating, lingered for a moment on Jasmine, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. "This is an unsolved problem," he reiterated, his voice smooth, almost patronizing. "If anyone in this room can solve it, I'll personally recommend them for an immediate research position." The bait was laid, the trap sprung. Jasmine knew the implication, the unspoken challenge. It was a dare, veiled in the guise of an opportunity. He didn't believe anyone could solve it, least of all her. He was making a spectacle, using this problem as a public execution of her aspirations. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the silence. Doubt gnawed at the edges of her certainty. Was she misreading the situation? Was she projecting her own insecurities onto Langley's actions? Maybe it was just a difficult problem, a genuine test of their abilities. But the look in his eyes, the subtle curl of his lip, told a different story. It was a story of power, of control, and of the quiet satisfaction of putting someone in their place. Jasmine's breath hitched. The internal struggle raged. To solve the problem would be to expose herself, to invite further scrutiny, perhaps even more pointed hostility. To remain silent, to feign ignorance, would be to betray herself, to allow him to win. The pen trembled in her hand. Her mind raced, calculating the risks, weighing the potential consequences. She thought of her parents, their sacrifices, their unwavering belief in her. She thought of the burning desire within her, the insatiable hunger for knowledge, for understanding. The silence in the room seemed to stretch, each tick of the clock a hammer blow against her resolve. Then a shift, a quiet, internal realignment. The fear didn't disappear, but it was no longer the dominant force. It was replaced by something else, something stronger, something that tasted like defiance. With a slow, deliberate movement, Jasmine uncapped her pen. The click resonated in the sudden stillness, a small act of rebellion. The ink flowed onto the paper, smooth and dark, each stroke a testament to her quiet strength, her unwavering determination. The solution unfolded before her, a complex dance of symbols and logic. She didn't rush, didn't falter. Each equation, each step, was a deliberate act of defiance, a silent scream against the walls of prejudice that had been built around her. The room held its breath. Whispers, like the rustling of dry leaves, rippled through the rows of desks. Heads turned, eyes widened. Dr. Whitmore, who had been grading papers with an air of detached indifference, looked up, his gaze fixed on Jasmine, a flicker of surprise in his usually impassive expression. Langley's amusement had vanished, replaced by a look of incredulity, then slowly, by something that resembled unease. As Jasmine finished the last line, a strange calm descended upon her. The buzzing of the lights faded, the weight of the gazes lifted. She stood, her movements measured and deliberate, and walked towards the front of the room. The rustle of whispers intensified, a chorus of disbelief and grudging admiration. She placed her paper on Langley's desk, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. Their eyes met. His gaze, once filled with smug superiority, now held a flicker of something else, something that looked a lot like fear. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't need to. The solution, laid bare on the paper, spoke for itself. It was a testament to her brilliance, her resilience, and her refusal to be silenced. It was a victory, not just over a difficult problem, but over the insidious forces that had sought to diminish her. It was a declaration of independence, a promise of a future where her voice would be heard. The stale air of the lecture hall hung heavy, thick with the scent of chalk dust and the almost palpable weight of expectation. Jasmine could feel the prickle of gazes on her back, a tangible tapestry woven from skepticism and thinly veiled derision. Dr. Langley's condescending smile, a grotesque caricature of encouragement, played on his lips. He'd presented this problem, a Gordian knot of theoretical physics, as an insurmountable challenge, a test designed to separate the wheat from the chaff. Jasmine knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that he hadn't expected her to be the one to attempt untangling it. He'd expected her to shrink back, to confirm his preconceived notions of her place in this hallowed hall of academia. He wanted to see me fail, she thought, the thought a bitter shard of ice in her chest. He wanted to use this as proof, as justification for the subtle dismissals, the pointed silences, the way he consistently overlooked her contributions in class. But Jasmine was not one to back down from a challenge. She approached the chalkboard, the rhythmic click of her heels against the polished floor echoing in the sudden, expectant hush. The chalk felt cool and smooth in her hand, a grounding presence against the storm brewing inside her. Langley's voice, laced with a patronizing warmth, still rang in her ears. "By all means, Miss Moreau, indulge us. Show us your interpretation of this complex conundrum." The emphasis on interpretation hadn't been lost on her. It was a veiled implication, a suggestion that any attempt she made would be nothing more than a naive, flawed understanding of subject far beyond her grasp. "He thinks I'm playing pretend," she thought, a flicker of anger igniting within her. "He thinks this is a game." But for Jasmine, it was far more than a game. It was a battleground, a silent war waged against the invisible walls of prejudice and the suffocating weight of underestimated potential. With a deep breath, she began to write. The equations flowed from her mind to the chalk, each stroke precise, each symbol a testament to years of dedicated study, of nights spent poring over textbooks while the world outside slept. The silence in the room deepened, broken only by the rhythmic scratch of chalk against the board. She could feel the weight of the collective gaze intensifying, a physical pressure against her back. Doubt flickered in the periphery of her awareness, a whispering voice reminding her of the risks, of the potential for humiliation. "What if I'm wrong?" the voice hissed, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the intricate dance of numbers and symbols unfolding before her. As the solution began to take shape, a strange calm settled over her. The initial surge of anger and resentment dissipated, replaced by a quiet, unwavering focus. She was no longer aware of the audience, of the judging eyes, of the suffocating atmosphere of the lecture hall. There was only the problem and the elegant, undeniable logic of its solution. It was as if the universe itself was speaking through her, revealing its secrets in a language only she could understand. The final equation hung in the air, a bold declaration of intellectual prowess. The silence in the room stretched, taut, and vibrating with unspoken awe. Jasmine stepped back, her hands still faintly dusted with chalk. The room, bathed in the afternoon sun, felt strangely still, as if time itself had paused to witness this quiet triumph. She met Langley's gaze, his usual smugness replaced by a stunned disbelief. The condescending smile was gone, replaced by a thin, tight line. His eyes, usually gleaming with a self-satisfied arrogance, were now wide, almost vacant. Whitmore, who had been observing with his usual detached air, straightened in his seat. His pen, which had been idly tracing patterns on his notepad, stopped. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the board, a flicker of something akin to respect or perhaps begrudging admiration in his eyes. The subtle shift in the room's atmosphere was almost palpable. The skepticism had evaporated, replaced by a stunned silence, a silent acknowledgement of the undeniable brilliance displayed before them. A low murmur rippled through the students, a wave of whispered disbelief. Jasmine met their gazes, a quiet strength settling within her. This was not about proving them wrong. It was about proving herself right. It was about claiming her space, her right to exist and excel in this world that had tried so hard to diminish her. She turned back to the board, her gaze lingering on the intricate web of equations she had woven. It was more than just a solution to a problem. It was a declaration, a silent testament to her resilience, her unwavering determination, and her undeniable brilliance. It was a message written in the universal language of logic and reason, a message that echoed in the stunned silence of the lecture hall. I am here, and I will not be ignored. The fluorescent lights of the classroom hummed, a dull counterpoint to the silence that had fallen. Dust motes danced in the beams, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred. Dr. Langley's fingers, still clutching Jasmine's paper, trembled slightly. His face, usually a mask of academic detachment, was creased with an almost comical bewilderment. He'd constructed this problem specifically to be unsolvable, a subtle but effective way to put Jasmine in her place. Yet here it was solved, elegantly, effortlessly solved. He could feel the weight of the other students' gazes, a tangible pressure against his back. How? He thought, the question a frantic whisper in his mind. How could she possibly? It felt as if the very foundations of his carefully constructed world were cracking. Dr. Whitmore, standing beside him, appeared outwardly calmer, but Jasmine could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. He adjusted his glasses, a nervous tick she'd observed before, and cleared his throat. Well, Miss Jasmine, he began, his voice lacking its usual crispness. This is certainly unexpected. Unexpected. The word hung in the air, a testament to their shared presumption of her inadequacy. Jasmine felt a flicker of something cold, hard, and satisfying unfurl within her chest. It wasn't quite triumph, not yet. It was more akin to the quiet satisfaction of a carefully laid plan coming to fruition. She'd anticipated their disbelief, their desperate scramble to regain control. It was a predictable pattern, one she'd observed countless times throughout her academic life. A low murmur rippled through the classroom. Whispers, glances, the rustle of papers. The other students, initially dismissive of her attempts, were now looking at her with a mixture of awe and something else. Was it respect? For the first time since she'd entered this hallowed hall of academia, Jasmine felt a shift in the invisible walls that had always seemed to separate her from her peers. The air crackled with a new energy, a palpable acknowledgement of her abilities. She'd broken through. Langley, recovering slightly, forced a cough. While disillusionized and intriguing, he said, the word intriguing dripping with thinly veiled skepticism, it's unconventional. Perhaps you could walk us through your reasoning, Miss Jasmine? He emphasized her name again, as if the very act of uttering it was a concession. Jasmine met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Inside, a storm of emotions raged. Anger at his condescension, frustration at the constant need to prove herself, and a sliver of pity. He was so desperate to cling to his authority, to maintain the illusion of his intellectual superiority. "It's all right there," she said, her voice quiet but steady, tapping the paper with her finger. The equations, the logic, the elegant solution, it was all laid bare, a testament to her understanding. She could see the confusion still swirling in Langley's eyes, the desperate attempt to grasp concepts that seemed to elude him. "Anyone else need me to explain it?" she added, her gaze sweeping across the room, meeting the eyes of her classmates. The question hung in the air, a challenge, an invitation, a subtle but definitive shift in power. The silence returned, heavier this time, pregnant with unspoken realizations. The other students, emboldened by her defiance, began to examine the solution themselves. Murmurs of comprehension replaced the earlier whispers of doubt. Jasmine watched them, a flicker of something akin to warmth spreading through her. This wasn't just about proving herself to the professors. It was about showing the others, the ones who had been too intimidated, too complacent to question the existing hierarchy, that they too could challenge the status quo. Langley's face flushed a deep crimson. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, his usual eloquence failing him. He glanced at Whitmore, as if seeking support, but found only a carefully neutral expression. Whitmore, ever the pragmatist, seemed to have grasped the reality of the situation. Jasmine had won. The battle, at least. Jasmine, sensing their defeat, allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but of quiet satisfaction. She hadn't sought this confrontation, but she wouldn't shy away from it either. This classroom, this institution, it was all a game, and she was finally learning how to play. The rules were rigged, the playing field uneven, but she had found a way to navigate the labyrinth, to carve her own path. The weight of their expectations, their prejudices, their attempts to confine her, it all felt lighter now, almost insignificant. She had found her voice, not in shouting or grand pronouncements, but in the quiet, unwavering assertion of her own intellect. And in that quiet assertion, she found her power. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a new sound, the quiet hum of her own determination. The dust motes still danced in the beams of light, but the world, her world, had irrevocably shifted. The game had changed, and she was ready to play. The fluorescent lights of the hallway hummed a monotonous tune, a counterpoint to the silence that descended after the last student shuffled out. Jasmine lingered by the window, the cool glass a stark contrast to the simmering heat in her chest. She watched the late afternoon sun paint the campus in long, hazy shadows, a familiar landscape that had, until today, felt alienating. The midterm, the supposedly insurmountable problem, lay solved in her bag, a tangible weight against her hip, a more substantial victory than the hollow silence of the classroom after she'd presented her solution. They had stared, Langley and Whitmore, their expressions carefully neutral, yet the flicker of something in their eyes, disbelief, perhaps, or reluctant respect had been enough. A small, almost involuntary smile touched her lips. The victory wasn't about proving them wrong, not entirely. It was about proving herself right. The quiet, unshakable conviction she'd carried for years, the one that whispered she belonged here, despite the subtle snubs and the constant underestimation, finally resonated, no longer a whisper, but a clear, strong note. Footsteps echoed in the now empty hallway, the distinct click of heels against the polished floor announcing the arrival of Langley and Whitmore. Jasmine's hand instinctively tightened on the strap of her bag, a familiar surge of anxiety momentarily eclipsing the triumph. She considered leaving, slipping away unnoticed, but a new resolve held her rooted to the spot. She wouldn't cede the ground she'd gained. They stopped a few feet away, the silence stretching, thick with unspoken words. Langley's usual air of smug superiority seemed slightly diminished, replaced by a guarded curiosity. Whitmore, as ever, was harder to read, his expression a carefully composed mask. Jasmine held her breath, the air heavy with the scent of chalk dust and old books, the familiar academic smell that had once been a source of comfort, then a reminder of her isolation, and now, perhaps, something else entirely. Something shifting. "Ms. Nguyen," Langley began, his voice lacking its usual condescending edge. It was almost respectful. Almost. "Where exactly did you learn that method?" His gaze was sharp, searching, like he was trying to dissect the source of her unexpected brilliance. Jasmine met his gaze, her own steady and unyielding. The question, though seemingly innocuous, carried the weight of all the unspoken accusations, the implicit doubts about her ability, her right to be here. For a fleeting moment, a familiar wave of anger threatened to break through her carefully constructed composure. She imagined throwing the question back at him, listing the countless hours spent poring over textbooks they hadn't even assigned, the late nights wrestling with complex theories they skimmed over in class. But she swallowed the retort, knowing that a display of anger would only confirm their prejudices. "From books," she replied, her voice even and calm, belying the storm brewing within. The simple answer, deliberately devoid of any further explanation, hung in the air, a silent challenge. Let them decipher its meaning. Let them grapple with the realization that she had surpassed their expectations not through some underhanded method, but through sheer hard work and dedication. The subtle shift in Langley's expression was almost imperceptible, a flicker of genuine surprise, perhaps even a grudging admiration. Whitmore, his face still an enigma, offered a curt nod, the barest hint of acknowledgment in his eyes. It was enough. Jasmine allowed herself a small, inward sigh of relief. The heavy weight that had settled in her chest at the beginning of the semester, the oppressive feeling of being an outsider looking in, seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. She had not sought their approval, not really. But their reluctant acknowledgment, their forced confrontation with their own misjudgment, was a validation nonetheless. Turning, she walked away, the click of her own heels against the polished floor echoing in the quiet hallway, a counterpoint to the hum of the fluorescent lights. She didn't look back. The conversation, short and simple as it was, had marked a turning point. It was a declaration of independence, a silent assertion of her place within those hallowed halls. As she stepped out into the fading light, the campus no longer felt alien, but a landscape she was slowly, steadily making her own. The air was still tinged with the scent of chalk and old books, but now it was a scent of possibility, of a future where her brilliance would no longer be questioned, but celebrated. The lingering discomfort of Langley and Whitmore was a small price to pay for this newfound sense of freedom. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, this small victory was enough. It was a breath of fresh air, a promise of more to come. She had planted her flag, not with arrogance, but with quiet, unwavering conviction. And they had seen it. They had finally seen her. The biting wind whipped at the loose strands of Jasmine's hair, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere she'd just escaped. The concrete steps of the university building were cold beneath her worn sneakers, a physical grounding after the dizzying heights of her unexpected triumph. She closed her eyes, the image of Langley's stunned face, Whitmore's carefully neutral expression, and the bewildered stares of her classmates burned onto her retinas. A small, almost involuntary smile tugged at the corner of her lips. The taste of victory, she realized, was less sweet, more metallic, like the faint tang of blood after biting your tongue. The midterm question, dubbed Unsolvable by Langley himself, had been a deliberate attempt to put her in her place. She'd felt it in the condescending tone he used when explaining the parameters, in the almost imperceptible shake of his head as she'd reached for the chalk. They expected her to fail, expected her to stumble, to falter, to prove their preconceived notions right. They wanted her to confirm their biases, to solidify her position as the outsider, the anomaly in their meticulously ordered academic world. Jasmine's hand tightened around the strap of her worn backpack. The weight of it felt reassuring, a tangible reminder of the countless hours she'd poured into studying, the silent battles fought against doubt and discouragement. She had considered feigning confusion, playing the role they'd cast for her. The thought had flitted across her mind, a dark flicker of resentment. Why bother proving anything to people who refuse to see? Why fight a battle already rigged against her? But then, something within her, a stubborn ember of defiance, had flared to life. It wasn't about them. It was about her. It was about the quiet, unshakable belief in her own abilities, a belief that had been nurtured in the solitude of late nights and the hushed whispers of her own ambition. The wind picked up, swirling fallen leaves around her feet like a miniature whirlwind. She opened her eyes, the cityscape stretching out before her, a tapestry of steel and glass shimmering under the late afternoon sun. Each building, each street, each flickering light represented a story, a struggle, a triumph. And she, Jasmine, was a part of that intricate narrative. Her victory in that classroom wasn't just about solving a complex equation. It was about claiming her space in a world that constantly tried to push her to the margins. She thought of her mother, a woman who had faced similar battles, similar prejudices, in a different arena. She remembered her mother's quiet strength, the way she held her head high in the face of adversity, the way she'd instilled in Jasmine the importance of resilience, of unwavering self-belief. They may try to dim your light, Jasmine, she'd often say, but never let them extinguish it. Your brilliance is your shield, your perseverance your sword. The memory brought a warmth to Jasmine's chest, chasing away the lingering chill of the wind. She took a deep breath, the crisp autumn air filling her lungs, a tangible symbol of renewal, of a new chapter unfolding. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. She knew there would be more hurdles, more subtle dismissals, more attempts to undermine her. But she also knew that she was stronger now, more resolute. She had faced their doubts, their prejudices, and emerged victorious. She started walking, her steps firm and purposeful against the cold pavement. The city noise, usually a cacophony of competing sounds, faded into the background, replaced by the steady rhythm of her own thoughts. She wouldn't be silenced. She wouldn't be intimidated. She would continue to learn, to grow, to challenge the status quo. She would continue to be a beacon, a testament to the power of quiet resilience, a living embodiment of the belief that brilliance knows no boundaries, no limitations, no predetermined categories. They underestimate the quiet ones, she thought, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. They think silence is acquiescence, that stillness is weakness. But they don't understand. Silence is where we gather our strength. Stillness is where we hone our focus. And when we finally speak, when we finally move, it's with the force of 1,000 storms. The setting sun cast long shadows across the street, painting the cityscape in hues of orange and gold. Jasmine walked on, her silhouette merging with the urban landscape, a silent warrior preparing for the battles to come, her heart filled with a quiet, unwavering determination. She knew her journey was far from over, but she also knew that she was ready. The world may try to define her, to confine her, to diminish her, but she would define herself. She would carve her own path, write her own story, and leave her indelible mark on a world that had yet to fully comprehend the depth of her brilliance. And in the quiet spaces between the noise, in the stillness between the storms, she would continue to rise.